They made her stand barefoot in front of the others, not because her shoes were missing, but because they wanted to prove she couldn't run. 7 women stood behind her, hair braided, faces painted, backs straight, each one with a dowry, goats, a quilt, a letter from a preacher. Roselle had none of those things, just a scar on her lower stomach, the whisper of a miscarriage that had followed her from 3 towns over, and the cruel word pinned to her dress like a target: empty. The auctioneer didn't bother describing her. "You all know what she is," he said. "Useless for breeding, but might warm your bed if you keep the room dark." Laughter cracked from the crowd like gunfire. A rancher spat. A widow covered her daughter's ears. And Roselle? She just stood there, jaw clenched, fingers twitching at her sides. She'd tried to hide the bleeding once, back when it first happened. But word travels faster than a woman's shame can outrun it. "No takers?" the auctioneer asked. "Not even for free?" A man stepped forward, just a boy, really, and reached for her wrist. She braced, but then he stopped, turned to the crowd and said, "I'll wait for a better one." Another round of laughter. The other women shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped out of line. She wasn't just last, she was beneath last. That's when the wind changed. A hush passed through the square like a blade slicing breath. A Lakota warrior rode in on a painted horse. No announcement, no guide. His hair was braided back tight, his chest bare beneath his beaded vest, his gaze fixed on the line of brides as if judging the worth of each from a place deeper than their dresses. He dismounted in one clean motion and walked past the auctioneer without a word. Past the preacher. Past all 7 of the offered women. Until he stood in front of Roselle, scarred, sunburned, shamed, and reached into the leather pouch at his side. From it, he pulled a thin cord strung with 2 white beads and 1 red. He held it out, steady, wordless. No one moved. No one spoke. In Lakota tradition, such a necklace meant one thing: choice. And he had chosen her. At first, no one believed what they were seeing. Roselle didn't even move. Her eyes flicked to the beads, then to his face, stoic, unreadable, beautiful in a way that made the jeering men shift in their boots. The auctioneer laughed nervously. "Now hold on. This isn't a game. These women are—" The Lakota warrior didn't flinch. His hand remained outstretched. The necklace dangled between them like a challenge not just to her, but to everyone watching. Roselle felt heat rise in her chest. Not from embarrassment, but confusion. Why her? Why not one of the others, dressed in silk and smiles? She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Behind her, one of the other brides, tall, blonde, dimpled, stepped forward and hissed under her breath, "Don't you dare take it. It's pity." Another whispered, "Or a trap." But the warrior heard none of it. Or if he did, he didn't care. Slowly, as if her fingers no longer belonged to her, Roselle reached out and touched the necklace. She didn't take it, just touched it, lightly. The crowd murmured. Someone shouted, "He doesn't even speak our tongue. How do we know what this means?" But one of the older townsmen, a fur trader who had spent seasons among the Lakota, spoke up. "It means he's not taking a wife by force. He's asking." A silence thicker than smoke followed. That was worse, somehow, than if he'd stolen her. Worse than a kidnapping or a claim. This was willful. He saw her. He knew. And he still chose. The warrior stepped closer and gently looped the necklace over Roselle's head. His fingers brushed her collarbone, warm and careful. Then, without a glance at the auctioneer, he turned and walked back toward his horse. Roselle looked around. No one moved to stop him. The other brides stared in stunned silence, their dowries suddenly irrelevant. The crowd parted like wheat, unsure whether to be angry or afraid. As she stepped forward to follow, one man shouted, "He'll get tired of her like the rest." Another sneered, "What good is a bride who can't give him sons?" The Lakota warrior paused, mounted his horse, and said, clear as day in perfect English, "Not everything worth keeping needs to be born from you." Then he extended his hand behind him. And Roselle took it. The ride was long, but not hard. Tewin didn't speak, not during the crossing of the river, not as they moved past the border pines where the last military patrols had burned brush to mark their claim. He didn't glance at her, didn't test her weight behind him, didn't explain where they were going. And still, Roselle didn't feel afraid. She'd spent years surrounded by words that tore her down. His silence felt clean. When the sun began to dip, they reached a ridge that overlooked a wide basin. Smoke curled from a circle of earthen lodges nestled between cottonwoods and corn plots. Children played near a drying rack, and two old women pounded acorns into flour. But Tewin didn't descend. Instead, he veered east, toward a solitary hut at the edge of a dry creek. There, without ceremony or command, he dismounted and motioned for her to do the same. She slid off carefully, unsure whether she was about to be left or claimed. He pointed toward the hut, then toward her, and then said, finally, "You'll stay here." She frowned. "Not with you?" He didn't answer, just turned and rode downhill towards the village without looking back. Roselle stood alone in the silence, heart pounding with a different kind of uncertainty. She wasn't prisoner. She wasn't guest. She was placed. Inside the hut was a blanket, a bowl, and a water skin. Nothing more. No sign of another woman. No hint of preparation. She stepped back out and looked towards the village. No one stared. No one approached. The world didn't shift to welcome her, but it hadn't rejected her either. That was new. She sat on the stoop until dark, unsure whether to cry or be grateful. That night, as stars stitched the sky above her, she thought of the necklace still resting on her collarbone. She touched the red bead, then the two white ones. 3 parts. A pattern. A choice. Somewhere down in the village, she heard faint laughter. A child's voice, high and light, followed by Tewin's deep reply. That surprised her more than anything. She hadn't known he could laugh. She wrapped herself in the blanket, lay flat on the floor, and whispered to no one, "What did you see in me that made you stop?" There was no answer. But just before sleep took her, she swore she heard footsteps pause outside her hut. Then retreat, like someone making sure she had stayed. Roselle awoke before dawn to the sound of hushed voices just beyond the hut. 2 women speaking in Lakota, one older, one sharp and impatient. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the tone. Scrutiny. She'd heard it from church wives and midwives, from school teachers who believed silence meant guilt. She stayed still, eyes just barely open. When the voices faded, she rose and stepped outside. A basket of fresh cornmeal and herbs had been left by the door, covered with cloth. A kindness, but one wrapped in warning. She was being observed, measured. Tewin hadn't returned, and the village remained at a distance. She spent the morning walking a loop around the creek bed, eyes scanning the horizon, not for escape, but for meaning. Why bring her here only to vanish? That night she lit a small fire from dry sticks near the back of the hut. She didn't know if it was allowed, but no one came. As the flames grew, a shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing, short, slight, watching her from behind a thin tree. A child. She tilted her head gently. "You can come closer if you want." No answer. just those big, dark eyes fixed on her like she'd stepped out of a story they'd been warned never to believe. The child disappeared into the trees. But the next night, they returned. This time, closer, and this time, not alone. A second child, a girl perhaps, peered from behind the first. Roselle didn't speak. She just placed a handful of dried berries on a flat stone near the fire and walked away. By morning, the berries were gone. On the third night, a group of 4 children sat in the distance, saying nothing but watching her every move. How she stirred the fire, how she folded her blanket, how she didn't cry even when no one came. And then on the 4th night, Tewin returned. He didn't bring gifts or questions, just sat across from her by the fire. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said, "They've been watching you." "The children?" she asked. "The whole camp," he replied. "Not to judge, to see if you'd leave like the others." Roselle swallowed. "Others?" Tewin's face hardened. 7 brides in 1 year, all came wanting sons. None stayed without them. She stared into the fire. "I didn't come wanting anything." He nodded. "That's why I brought you." Tewin didn't speak again for a while. He sat with his back straight, legs folded beneath him, gaze steady on the flames. Roselle watched him from across the fire, trying to decipher the silence. It wasn't cold. It was heavy, like something had been held too long and was beginning to split. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than she expected. "I once had a wife." Roselle didn't answer. He hadn't spoken for comfort. "She was strong, rode better than me, laughed like thunder in the mountains." He paused, eyes flicking towards the tree line. "She died giving me a son. Both were lost before dawn." Roselle's breath caught, but she held it. "I was away that night," he continued. "Trade route. I came back to blood and ash and an elder who said nothing but this: 'Don't try again until you know what you're giving, not just what you want to take.'" He looked at her then, not past her, not through her, at her. "That's why I never chose the others. They came with their hands out." "You didn't." Roselle felt heat rise in her chest, but not from shame. It was the heat of being seen without being asked to prove herself first. "I wasn't exactly full of options," she said softly. He smiled, and it wasn't pity. It was quiet agreement. "The ones who've lost something," he said, "often know better how to hold what's fragile." She reached up and touched the beads around her neck. "This necklace, does it still mean what it did when you gave it?" Tewin nodded once. "It means I see you." "But not for marriage?" she asked carefully. He didn't flinch. "Not unless it is chosen again, by both." That landed deep. She looked into the fire and whispered, "They called me empty." He didn't argue, didn't soothe. He simply replied, "So did they call the land before it bloomed." That night, he didn't stay. But when she woke at dawn, the children had left something near the fire, a bundle of wildflowers tied in grass string, not for beauty, for recognition. And under it, the smallest one had carved a word into the dirt: Anicia. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew it was hers. By the 6th morning, Roselle stopped waiting for someone to tell her where to go or what to do. She rose early, gathered kindling, and began to sweep the area around the hut with a branch broom she'd knotted together by hand. The smoke from her cooking fire now drifted straight into camp, and no one stopped her. Children came first, closer each time, less cautious. A girl with a crooked braid handed her a bundle of acorns and didn't wait for thanks. A boy dropped a smooth stone at her feet, then ran off laughing. They didn't need words. She was building something, and they knew it. That evening, a woman approached, tall, scarred along one cheek, arms strong from years of skinning hides. She didn't smile, but she nodded. In her hand was a clay pot, heavy with stew. "For the one who stayed," she said, and walked away before Roselle could respond. That was the first night Roselle ate without rationing. She gave the last scoop to the girl with the crooked braid. The next day, Teowen returned. Not with a ceremony, not with an announcement, but with a bundle of willow saplings and a digging stick. He planted one at the edge of her fire ring and stepped back. "You will build here," he said, "not where the others came to take and leave." She looked at the sapling, thin and shaking in the breeze. "It might die," she said. "Most things do," he replied, "but not everything that dies was a mistake." Then he handed her a tool wrapped in leather, an adze, shaped and worn, not new. "It was hers," he added, meaning his first wife. "Now it's yours." Roselle's hand trembled as she took it. "I won't try to be what she was." "Good," he said without hesitation. "Be what she never got the chance to become." That night, for the first time since arriving, Roselle didn't sleep in the hut. She lay beneath the stars beside the willow shoot, the earth still raw around its roots. The fire she'd built crackled nearby, and 3 children slept within reach, heads resting on her shawl. She wasn't a bride, she wasn't a mother. Not yet. But she was chosen, not because of what she could give, but because of what she refused to leave behind. It was near the end of the moon cycle when the riders came. 3 women in worn dresses and sun-faded bonnets, their hair pinned high, their eyes sharp with something heavier than judgment. Roselle was gathering wild onions with the crooked, braided girl when she heard the hooves. The girl ran back toward the huts, but Roselle didn't flinch. She knew these faces. They were 3 of the 7 who had stood behind her at the auction. 3 of the ones who'd smirked when the paper on her back had read, "Empty." They dismounted awkwardly, unused to the terrain, and one of them, Eliza, who had once been the favorite pick, stepped forward. "We heard he took you," she said. Not a greeting. A test. Roselle straightened. "He didn't take me. He chose." "So you're his now?" another woman asked. "Or did he get bored already?" The third one, quiet, the one who had once cried during the bidding, didn't speak at all. Just looked around, eyes falling on the children, the garden rose, the fire pit. Roselle didn't rise to the bait. "Why are you here?" "Because the man I married can't keep his hands off the bottle or the maid," Eliza snapped. "Because the town's preacher told Lucy she was wicked for leaving her husband, even when he beat her." The quiet one finally spoke. "Because we thought being chosen meant being safe." Roselle looked at them, not with pity, not with victory, just understanding. "It doesn't," she said softly. "It just means someone saw what others missed." Teowen arrived minutes later, having been summoned by a boy sent running from the ridge. He looked at the women, then at Roselle, who gave a single nod. "They're not here to take anything," she said, "just to see if what they heard was true." Teowen turned to the women. "You're welcome to rest," he said, "but no one is chosen twice unless they know how to stay." That night, one of the women left. One stayed only until dawn, but the third, quiet, steady, sat beside Roselle at the fire and whispered, "No one called me empty, but they made me feel it anyway." Roselle handed her the ladle. "Then fill something here." And so she did. By the next week, they began calling the ridge above Roselle's hut the second fire. It wasn't official. No elder had carved it into bone or etched it in clay. But the children said it first, because that's where the other fire burned each night, the one not for ceremony or defense, but for comfort, the one that always had someone waiting beside it. Roselle had never asked for a name, but the name came anyway, just like the hands that began to help her. a young boy who brought water daily without being told, a widow who left bundles of pine resin for her cooking pit, an elder who offered advice on how to mend the cracked walls of the hut without saying why. Even the skeptical ones, those who had folded their arms at her arrival, began to greet her, not with warmth, but with acknowledgement. Tewan visited less now, but when he did, he came with silence and work. He helped dig a small irrigation line, added stones to her fire ring, and carved a wooden figure for the children to play with. They didn't speak of marriage. They didn't speak of love. What passed between them was something older than either. Trust unspoken. One evening, as the sun fell behind the peaks, a group of children gathered around Roselle with dried grass in their hands. "We're building the dream fence," they said, "to keep in what's good." She smiled, unsure what that meant. But she helped anyway. They wove it together, tying knots, laughing, placing feathers and beads into the frame. Then one of them said, "You should name this place." Roselle paused. She looked out over the garden rows that had begun to sprout. The fire, the new hut being shaped beside hers by the quiet woman who'd stayed, and the little circle of children who had once only watched her from the trees. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Anicia." "What's it mean?" the girl with the crooked braid asked. "It doesn't have to mean anything," Roselle said, "but it will." That night she placed the first finished piece of the dream fence at the edge of the garden. And just beyond it, Tewan stood in the shadows, not guarding, not testing, just watching something take root that no one had planned for, but everyone had needed. Tewan arrived at dusk with a question in his eyes. Not a warning, not a request, just something long held that had finally ripened into speech. He didn't dismount. He just stood beside his horse, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the small wooden post that now marked the edge of Roselle's garden, the one carved with Anicia. "Why that word?" he asked. It wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity, quiet and earned. Roselle didn't answer right away. She was kneeling in the dirt, retying a sprouting bean plant that had slumped in the heat. When she stood, she wiped her hands on her skirt and faced him. "When I was a girl, my mother told me that some words don't come from language. They come from longing. Made-up names that carry weight, even if no one else understands them." Tewan nodded slowly. "So you created your own truth?" "No," she said softly. "I made space for one." He stepped closer then, for the first time crossing the invisible line he'd respected since the day he brought her here. His eyes searched hers, not to challenge, but to read. "You were meant to leave," he said. "The others did. Even the strong ones. I brought you here not to choose you, but to see if you would choose yourself." Roselle's throat tightened. "I almost didn't. I thought staying would feel like settling, but it's not." "What is it then?" She smiled, tired and full. "Becoming." Tewan removed the leather cord from his neck, one she'd never noticed before, and held it out. A different set of beads, 2 red, 1 white. "This isn't a marriage cord," he said. "Not yet. It's a vow of place. It means I will not unsee what I've seen in you." Roselle didn't hesitate. She reached out and accepted it, folding it gently into her palm. "Then I won't unsee what brought me here either." They stood like that until a child's voice called out from the garden, asking for help with a tangled trap. Tewan looked toward the sound, then back at her. "They follow you now," he said. "Not because you ask them to, but because you never walk ahead pretending to know the way." And then he turned and walked toward the call, without needing to look back. Roselle smiled. Because this time, she didn't need to follow. She already belonged. The naming ceremony was never announced. It simply happened, like rain after drought, like the bloom of a flower no one remembered planting. Elders gathered near the fire ring below Anicia Ridge. Children came with hands full of feathers and woven twine. The woman who had stayed, the one who used to be a bride herself, stood beside Roselle, both of them dressed not in white, but in color. Earth, sky, bone, flame. Teowen said nothing, but his presence beside Roselle was enough. The tribe's spiritual leader approached, laying before her a small woven mat covered in river clay. Upon it, the symbols were etched, a spiral, a flame, and an open hand. "This is not to name you," the elder said. "You already have a name. This is to mark where your footsteps began to grow others." No one spoke the word mother. No one mentioned her womb. But everyone knew what had happened. Since her arrival, 5 children had moved into the huts near hers. 3 of them had lost parents to fever. 1 had been abandoned by a distant band. 1 had simply stopped speaking after her mother died. And Roselle, without command, without plan, had become their still point. That night, the fire burned higher than it ever had. Teowen stepped forward and placed the second necklace, 2 red beads, 1 white, around her neck, beneath the first. "Not as wife," he said clearly, "but as kin, as voice, as guardian of what even warriors can't protect." Roselle didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned to the children, who were already gathering around her knees and elbows and hem, and knelt to their height. "From now on," she said gently, "you sleep near the fire, not near fear." The smallest girl whispered, "What if someone says you don't belong?" Roselle smiled, brushed a braid from the child's face, and answered, "Then they're standing in the wrong story." Laughter followed, not loud, but deep. And as night stretched long, and the fire cracked and the village breathed as one, Roselle sat still. Children pressed against her like roots, and felt no need to be anything but what she was. No one ever called her empty again. They called her Anicia. And everyone in that camp knew exactly what that meant, even if no word for it had ever existed before. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you had seen him choose her over all the others, would you have stepped forward too? Tell us in the comments.